Yay. All right. Good morning, everybody. Glad to see we got folks in. Slightly doing this new format where it's an event on LinkedIn because, LinkedIn loves changing how their application works. And they definitely believe in shipping code and worry about it later. But hey, it's working. Glad to see everybody's on. Hey, David, glad you're here from New York. Dan's on already. I know Sidhar's actually watching this on YouTube. Hey, Sidhar, you owe me an email because I owe you a t-shirt. So ping me on LinkedIn and send me one. Everyone else, make sure you grab a coffee, smack that share button, post this out to your friends, and hit every emoji that you can see on that LinkedIn screen. This is going to be a good one today because we're going to talk all about digital identity. We're going to talk about KYC. We're going to talk about Oakland. I don't know. You'll probably hear Laura's dog at some point. What's your dog's name, Laura?
Let's get Ruby.
Ruby. What kind of dog is Ruby?
She's a German Shepherd mix of some kind. Yeah.
We will definitely see Ruby at some point.
Involved in a lot of video conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone comment on my haircut because it is awesome. First time in a while where I'm not wearing a hat. I'm so happy. And hey, David, good morning. All right, everybody, let's jump in because we've got a lot that we want to talk about. And I think this is a topic that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 29th episode of Fintech Insider, the Breakfast Show US. I'm Sam Maule. I'm 11FS Managing Director North America, and I'll be your host for this. Do let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear where our viewers are based. And please share the stream. You see that share button? Click it. Smack on those emojis that are there. Hit that like button. And please do subscribe to 11FS on LinkedIn so you never miss a show. Before we get into today's show, we just wanted to mention our latest bit of research that's just been dropped a few hours ago. This report explains the jobs to be done and cultural insights on what U.S. business owners need and the digital services that will help them meet their goals. Download the research for free. Let me repeat that part. Download the report and research for free by heading to bit.ly/digital SMB, all lowercase letters. On tomorrow's show, we'll have Vanessa Lee. She'll be coming to you live from London. She helped write this report, and we'll kind of talk about the findings that were there. I've looked at the report a few times now. I absolutely love it. Laura, I'm going to send you a copy right after this and get your feedback. And today we're happy to be joined by Laura Spiekerman, not Spikerman, as I have called her now for, a decade. Laura Spiekerman, the co-founder and CRO of Alloy. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of digital solutions during this pandemic and how Alloy are helping companies serve their customers smarter. And Laura, you are in Oakland, right?
I am in Oakland, California.
Even though you do bounce back and forth because you spend a decent amount of time in New York.
I do, not anymore. But until recently, I spend about a quarter of my time in New York, and the rest of my team and company is there.
And so, and we have Veronica on. Veronica from what used to be SunTrust and now Truist in Atlanta. What we're going to be talking about, so digital identity, fraud, KYC, KYB. Veronica, I expect some damn good questions today coming out of you. Okay, let's stump Laura, everyone.
Oh, no,
good luck.
Don't.
Yeah, good luck doing that, by the way, because you know this stuff inside and out. So I just threw out a ton of acronyms: KYC, KYB, so on and so forth. So Laura, if you don't mind, can introduce yourself and talk about especially why you co-founded Alloy. What is it you guys focus on?
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me. Alloy itself is an operating system for identity that it was built specifically for the financial services market. So what that means is that we help regulated financial institutions, and that can be banks, fintech companies, kind of a range of providers there, meet their identity requirements without sort of compromising on either compliance, risk, or the user experience. So what we do is perform, we're like an API and software platform that allows you to configure, test, execute, store, and analyze all of your identity decisions, KYC, AML, risk, fraud decisions in one single centralized place. So we work with really early stage companies. We work with top 20 banks. We work with credit unions, we work with community banks, and sort of everyone in between.
So I know when you were growing up, you thought, I'm going to start a company based on KYC,
That's
KYB.
Right. It was either ballerina or that.
So why? I mean, can you go back and remember what was the trigger moment when you went, yeah, we should actually do this? I'm always curious about that.
So I got really interested in fintech about 10 years ago when I was the first employee at a software company, a fintech company in East Africa that was it was bringing, if you're familiar with M-Pesa, it was trying to create a business application for M-Pesa. So if you were a barber shop, you'd be able to distribute and collect via M-Pesa. And I got really interested in financial services infrastructure that way. So I could see that East Africa was actually light years ahead of the US in many ways, the ability to transmit money real time, and saw that a lot of the limitations we have in the United States and other places around the world are around infrastructure that we have. So if you look at the US, we're pretty behind on things like ACH. That was where I got started and became really interested. I joined a very early stage company at that point. This is like 2014, where I met my current co-founders. And at that company, we were trying to speed up ACH and sort of bring it into the 21st century. What we realized was that ACH rails, payment rails, were one part of the problem, but that identity was actually holding a lot of the innovation back. So people were trying to validate users' identities in real time to meet their fraud and compliance requirements, but there's no single source of truth around identity in the United States. There's not like one database we can all reference. There are a bunch of fragmented databases, tons of bad information, outdated information. And so the kind of default position is to have someone fax in documents, call your call center, spend fax, which no one has. And so that means that you have this really bad user experience and people who try to sign up for apps, bank accounts, whatever, and just kind of give up. And so they're underserved. Banks spend a lot of money on this problem. Fintech companies spend a lot of money on this problem. And that was really compelling to me to try to solve from both how do you make this infrastructure more modern, but also how do you bring people into the financial world who might be excluded today because of identity.
You know what I love about you is this concept that, and you ran right by it, but that you were in Africa doing some work, and at the time where you're seeing M-Pesa kind of step up. So M-Pesa, if you don't know M-Pesa, everybody, this was Vodafone and Safaricom launching like a ability to do money transfer, pure mobile. In Kenya, if I remember right, Pesa is money in Swahili. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Hey, there you go, everybody. I know my useless trivia. But an incredible success story, to the point where I believe Safaricom actually acquired M-Pesa a few months ago. A great success story. I think something like 50 to 60% of the GDP in Kenya actually flows through M-Pesa. And the reason I love M-Pesa in that story, especially on what you do, Laura, is this concept of, like here in the US, our financial structure is so resilient and been around for so long, you really can't innovate. And then you look at somebody like M-Pesa that comes on and just absolutely tears up a market that didn't exist. I mean, comes in and just provides a solution, gets people into the financial services space, and taking those lessons for you. Where'd you go to school, Laura?
I went to Barnard College in New York City.
So coming from New York to Africa and then bringing some of your learnings back to the US to implement them, that's that full story that I love. I mean, I love everything about that.
Yeah, it's I sort of forget that that's where it started, and now we I think about US stuff so much, but it is interesting to think about Kenya in 2011 or whatever that was being sort of better than what we have. I use Venmo and it's great, but or Cash App, but it's still sort of like the ability for me to transfer you money is still pretty limited. Yeah. And in Kenya, they were doing it 10 years ago, no problem. So.
Yeah, it's there's a lot going on. For those that don't know, if you want to look at some case studies, you look at what's happening in Nigeria, Laos, around the fintech community there. You look at what's happening in Rwanda, is incredibly exciting. There are so many cool companies and ideas that you can take and translate. You just don't lift them, but you look at what's being done there and say, how can I apply them in Europe or in the US? It's fascinating what can be done.
I think there were a lot of attempts at like replicating M-Pesa in other countries. It didn't work. There were a lot of things that made that a unique scenario. And, I hope people can take the right lessons from it and try to apply them. But it's hard. It's very hard to replicate that success.
Yeah. Good question already. Siddharth, come on, dude. How can you already put out a good question? And we already did. Like I said, Siddharth, you owe me an email because I owe you a t-shirt. So ping me. Siddharth said, hey, this is a really cool solution. How does Alloy differ from, or is it similar to Trulio? Truly you. Oh my God, they yell at me every time. Kim Hong will kill me for saying their name wrong. Also good friends of ours. So awesome. Competitor. Yeah.
So we never really, we think like very highly of them, and I like the team there. We never really run into them sort of in a competitive scenario. The way that I think of them is, so we're an orchestration layer that sits on top of data sources. We are not a data source ourselves. So we have about 60 different data partners, where, those could be ID scanning companies, public records companies, fraud consortiums, all sorts of stuff. And we're the ability to pick and choose what you need and create workflows around that. They could be an input for that. And their kind of strength is actually one of our weaknesses, which is internet, like global coverage. So I think we go kind of deep in North America. We have kind of all the data coverage you could ever need and dream of, create endless workflows for all sorts of different products and scenarios and users. They are global coverage. So if you're a company that is trying to be in 100 countries, I think that's a great solution for you.
So I think I love that term. And if you don't mind, take it just a bit deeper when you say you're an orchestration level, orchestration component for this, because we throw this terminology out all the time on stage and in articles about API first, right? I bet if I got in a room with 100 bankers and asked them to explain to me what an API is, other than saying it's a Lego, that's about as deep as they could go. So when we talk about APIs and orchestration level, Laura, go ahead. Educate
what is
us. Yes.
So we are, I think of APIs probably not that more sophisticated than the bankers would in the room, but I think of it as pipes. So we're pipes to data, but the orchestration layer sort of sits on top of that those pipes, I guess, to data, and lets you configure exactly how you want to use everything. So our value proposition isn't just aggregate a bunch of data, because a bunch of data doesn't necessarily mean better signals, better decisions, better outcomes. What it means is that you're able to then manipulate the data so that you can have a holistic image rather than a linear image of a person. So an applicant comes in, generally the way decisions are made is very linear. So you're saying, if you didn't meet this rule, this very kind of strict rule I have around fraud or your address matching or something else, you're going to get kicked out of the funnel. But if we think about it more holistically, about identity being sort of a mishmash of different signals, then I can say, well, your address didn't match here, but everything else looked really good. It's probably because you moved in the last 2 years and your address hasn't been updated in LexisNexis. So let's go look at some other signals, like where your device is, some other stuff. So that gives us a much more sort of accurate picture by being able to use this orchestration layer to bring the various data points together sort of more holistically.
Yeah, I always laugh when people talk about how APIs are the new thing, and you really API has been around since ever service-oriented architecture has been around since like 2000. This isn't anything new. I always laugh about that, right?
I think the bar is set really low in financial services. So a lot of the value of APIs is that it's real time. And that's like a brand new concept in financial services where most things are still not being done in real time.
Yeah.
So the bar, fortunately for us, the bar is set quite low.
And by the way, hello, Greece. Constantina, it just said hello from Greece. Hello, Greece. Hello, Greece. Get us a question. I love that. My daughter desperately wants to go to Greece. My 17-year-old daughter, whose bedroom I am in. The Arctic Monkeys and Green Day is not sitting in my office.
Makes you look cooler.
I know, they say that every show. Dan in London asked a great question. Do you plug into Refinitiv at Alloy? And hopefully I said that right.
We don't, and I don't know enough about Refinitiv to give you a great answer as to why not, but we don't. We plug into about 60 different data sources, some of which do have global coverage, but mostly are kind of North America focused.
Which is a decent sized market. All right, so let's if you don't mind, let's talk about that a little bit. So you gave some examples for your customers, and again, your customers are at all scale. Right before the show started, Laura's in Oakland. We were talking about an Oakland-based company, Marqeta, which is, more than likely going to IPO pretty soon. Jason Gardner and that team have done a tremendous job there. They were a very early customer of yours, were they not?
They were. Yeah. Yep, they're great.
So that's a good example. So you talked about customers all the way from Marqeta up to top 20 banks. I like what you talked about in that orchestration level about being able to do workflows around this. Can you give a couple more examples of that? Especially, let's look at what's happening with COVID and around identity, because that's front and center of everybody's mind, right? This fraud, because you do KYC and KYB, right?
We do both KYC and KYB. So I think we're seeing two things happen. One is that more banks, I think especially community banks, which are already struggling, pre-COVID, they're in a tough situation where they're just getting their lunch eaten, and I think they're being gobbled up in M&A scenarios kind of constantly. They're trying to figure out now how to go digital, and I think this COVID scenario has just sped everything up for them. So what we see is that they're trying to be a little bit more like some of the banks that we've been working with for a long time that have been digital first. So Radius Bank is a good example. NBC's Rising Bank, another good example, Happy State Bank. So there's a number of banks there that have sort of adopted this digital first strategy. And I think community banks with COVID are trying to follow suit. And not just community banks. I think lots of banks are saying like, hey, I got to close my branches. People don't want to come in anymore. I can't have them just, underserved, not opening accounts or flocking to big banks, fintech companies that already have this infrastructure built out. So we're really seeing that that come about. There's a bunch of data that's really valuable if you're trying to assess if someone really is who they say they are,
right?
But they're not in person. They're not showing you their ID. You're not looking at their face. The second thing we're seeing on the KYB front is, of course, around the PPP loans and being able to, as an SBA lender, get money to, process loan applications and get money to small businesses that are in desperate need. And I think for, the PPP program has had very mixed results, but the very least Alloy's hope is that we're able to help some of these SBA lenders get the money to these companies that are maybe harder to identify because they're smaller and not as sort of, ubiquitous, get this money to them faster.
So good question coming from Veronica. Way to step up, Veronica. I knew she would. I'm guessing Veronica is riding on her bike somewhere through one of the parks in Atlanta, and I don't blame her. I wish I was too. All right, you ready? Here we go, Laura. Do you provide decisioning or allow your clients to make pass-fail decisions based on the consortium you provide? And do you have a solution for thin files and synthetics?
Yes. So what we bring together all the consortiums we think are valuable around fraud and other stuff. So we have Secure, we have ID Analytics, we have Ekata, which is White Pages Pro. We have a whole bunch of different kind of consortiums and databases there. We don't share PII amongst our own clients, not something we want to do. But we have, so you can use Alloy to sort of determine your own fraud signals depending on how you view and how we recommend you view these various data sources and signals you're gathering. On the kind of synthetic front, there's a company called Centilink that I think is one of the sort of best examples of ways to fight synthetic identity fraud today. They're a San Francisco-based company. Really recommend checking them out. I think they have a great solution for synthetic identity fraud, and in a way that I have not seen others do it today.
So do me a favor, Laura. Let's break down some taxonomy. When we talk about synthetics, what are we referring to within the fraud space?
Yes, good question. So that is basically someone who's creating a new identity. So an identity of a person that doesn't actually exist. What they're doing is building up credit history. So I'm using this fake identity I've created. I'm taking out small loans, typically loans that are going to be sort of where they're small enough that you can kind of get them into the credit system. So get them started reporting to the credit bureaus. So we're not talking about a mortgage. We're not talking about a $100,000 loan. We're talking about something small to start. And you keep building it. You actually pay off those debts. So you have a really good loan kind of payment history. And then you do what's called bust out. And after you've built up enough credit, you bust out, you take out a $50,000 loan, and then you're gone and you don't exist. So there's no recourse. But what's scary about it is the bureaus have you in there as sort of a real person with real credit history. And that's our source of truth today is these credit bureaus. So that's probably a big problem to begin with.
What has surprised you the most since you've started the company, and fraud adopts fraud I don't want to say attempts, fraud methodologies and approaches change basically by the minute, right? I think
Speed of light.
I think that's safe to say. There are whole firms that this is all they do, and not only in the Ukraine, by the way. I'm sure there's one in Oakland. I know in Detroit, where I grew up, there's a couple. It's everywhere. I love that we just slam like the Ukraine constantly on this. That's everywhere, right? Because there's big money. I mean, that's just reality. What has surprised you the most? What are the changes that you've seen? I mean, obviously it's moving more and more online and digital. These folks are incredibly creative, are they not?
Very creative. This is their job, right? So like our jobs are not to fight. Well, my job happens to be to fight fraud, but most of our jobs as financial consumers is not to fight fraud. It is their job to commit fraud. They are professionals. And they have lots of tools at their disposal. I think the sort of surprising thing in part is like the tension between, as a consumer, wanting your financial experiences to be in real time, right? You want your transactions approved in real time. You want to move your money as fast as possible. You don't want to be limited to $20 just to, someone you know on Venmo. I think the sort of banks are, I didn't appreciate at least how much banks and fintech companies are faced with that tension, providing a really good customer experience. And I'm annoyed when I can't, do something in real time, when I can't send money the way I want to send it. But with making that decision with saying like, hey, this really might be fraud, and I'm actually trying to protect you as a financial institution. That tension is very real. I think we've seen a lot of not spectacular successes in that, like Zelle, I think is, they've really struggled with this problem. So I've been sort of, pleasantly siding with the banks on this one, which is not, I think, how I normally operate.
I'm curious because one of the things we know that's happening with PPP, the payroll protection program here in the U.S., which came as a result of the COVID crisis and the ridiculous unemployment that we're seeing right now, and shutdowns of businesses. But one of the significant worries is fraud there and folks applying for loans. So KYC, know your customer, when you're talking about consumers. KYB, now you're talking about knowing your business. What are some of the distinct differences between the two?
Yeah, so KYC, you're looking at the person's name, address, social security number, date of birth, things like that. On KYB, you're typically looking at the name of the business, the address of the business, the EIN associated with the business, sort of like the tax ID number. Yeah. There is a significant overlap, though, because a lot of these businesses all of the businesses have what are called ultimate beneficial owners, which are the owners of the business or the controllers or principals associated with the business. And when we talk about the PPP stuff, I look at a lot of the businesses that are in desperate need right now are very small companies, maybe with just a few people working there, or a few owners or sole props. So these are not like the Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or whatever. These are small companies. And so there's a real overlap between KYC and KYB there, where in order to validate a business, you're looking at, sure, you want to look at the business name and make sure it's a real business and, is registered with the state. But you also want to make sure that the person or the people affiliated with that business are real, that their phone numbers exist, that you can email them or call them. So there's a lot of fraud signals there that we've been, helping lenders check out to make sure that these people are kind of legitimate before you hand them a $20,000 or $90,000 loan.
So I've asked this question. I'm starting to ask this question to everybody who comes on this show because I'm really curious. I'm not going to say post-COVID, because post-COVID's going to be, Lord, the next year or two at a minimum. But what do you see as some of the I don't want to say the key learnings, but changes that we're going to see? I'm not saying a positive light, and I'm not going to say that around fraud and identity. Do you think we'll get like for example, there isn't a single trusted source of digital identity,
right?
Do you think we'll move more toward something like that? I know Dave Birch, Dave. We love Dave. He's always talked about digital passporting, right? For me to go from one bank to another, For the most part, I'm going through the same KYC process, and yes, I got to do it all over again. There's not the equivalent of a digital passport.
No.
Other than the token that Dave has tattooed in some weird part of his body that he likes to talk about. Do you think we'll move to something like that?
I don't.
Yeah, I don't either.
I wish we would, and I hope. I love the people working. I think there's a number of folks working on digital identity stuff, like particularly blockchain-powered things that I think are super optimistic and kind of wonderful, and I hope they're right about that. I don't think they are, because I think when you talk to banks and you talk to regulators, like that might be in the 20-year vision. That's not in the 5-year vision. And probably not in the 10-year vision. So I think you have to sort of build for the reality today. And then I really believe, and this is the way we work with banks today, that we get them comfortable with what we're doing because we use really traditional data sources alongside newer ones. So we say, sure, rely on Equifax. That's fine. Great. And then we start building in some other signals. So we take the secure fraud scores and some other stuff and say, hey, look at what this is doing. Get to know the data. We'll help you get comfortable with it. We'll run a million tests and help you get comfortable, and then sort of slowly migrate what you're doing. And I think that's the way we have to approach this as just an industry, is like, don't try to rip off the Band-Aid. It's not really going to work. People are going to get totally freaked out.
Yeah.
The regulatory environment in the US is pretty conservative. So let's start slow and move where we can. I think the COVID situation is proving that migration just needs to happen faster. We need to look at fraud signal, digital identities, and I don't mean commerce being done online. I mean, look at my digital presence as a real signal. It's not the only signal, and it shouldn't be the only signal, but it is potentially more valid than my home address. So I think we just need to take that stuff more seriously. And I think banks are doing that. I think community banks especially are sort of leading the way there.
Yeah, the thing I find interesting for those that are watching, so believe it or not, we've run out of time. When it comes to digital identity, which is an incredibly hot topic, I've got a handful of people globally that I really lean on for this topic. So Dave Birch in the UK, Emma Lindley.
Yeah, he's really an expert.
Yeah, and very funny as hell. Benny Hill, if he decided to go to digital identity. There you go, Dave. That's my compliment. Emma Lindley, Laura, I put right in that mix because I'm asked this a lot. So if you want 3 resources, boom, there's 3. I've got like Dan and Veronica who are watching this. I'm going to introduce you to Laura offline. But Laura, for everyone else who's been watching, what's the best place for them to learn and get in contact with you, talk with you, and also about Alloy?
So our website is just alloy, alloy.co. Feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm laura@alloy.co. We're on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. You can find us in all the places. But website and email are probably the best places to start for us.
I've never heard that line. You can find us in all the places. I love that. All right.
You can't find us in an office anymore. That's one place you won't find us.
Yeah. Come to Oakland. That's all for today, folks. Tomorrow, I'm joined by 11FS's very own Vanessa Lee, who will be telling us about their jobs to be done in the SMB landscape here in the U.S. and the opportunity spaces. This is just going to be a good conversation. Like I said, the report is incredible. I recommend you join in, and we'll talk about the methodology we use and also the learnings that we have. Again, if you know someone who would be perfect to come on the show, reach out to us at podcast11fs.com or reach out to me at Sam Maule on Twitter. Folks, thank you for joining us every day. We really do appreciate it. It's a fun way for me to get my morning kicked off and also to get my daughter out of bed, which, by the way, has been laying there the whole damn show. So what are you going to do? Folks, thanks again for joining. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Sam.